Alright everyone, welcome back to another video. Last time we left off with the Spanish War, talking about the Spanish-American War, and kind of the beginning of it, and kind of what happens during it. But we're now on to the Republican Roosevelt. While McKinley was attending an exposition at Buffalo, a man with a bandaged hand approached him. Under the bandage was a revolver. He shot the president, who died a few days later. Mark Hanna's nightmare had come true. That cowboy had become president. Theodore Roosevelt, the youngest man ever to become president, had a youthful energy and ambition. His old Dutch family was wealthy enough for him to have lived a life of comfortable leisure, but he preferred uh, activity. No man had ever a more varied career. He had been a rancher, a soldier, an author, a civil service administrator, police commissioner, naval officer, governor of New York, and reluctantly, vice president. He was interested in everything, and especially in political reform. He promised, sincerely enough, to follow in the footsteps of McKinley and carry out his policies, but his temperament prevented him from being the same kind of president. McKinley's republicanism, whoops, I went a little too far. I went a little too far there. McKinley was an intelligent, dignified, kindly man, but one who would rather follow than lead Congress and public opinion. Roosevelt shared McKinley's republicanism. He despised Bryan personally, and although as a mugwump he had fought against Blaine's nomination in 1884, he remained loyal to his party. But the resemblance ended there. In domestic matters, Roosevelt pressed on Congress railroad freight rate regulations, a Pure Food and Drug Act, and the conservation of the dwindling forests. He negotiated a settlement in the Anthrace coal strike. Let's see if there's more. Ah, there is. Thankfully, I was about to say, I can't just be at the end of Roosevelt there. And told the owners that if they did not consent to arbitration, my bad, he would have the government take and run the mines. He enforced antitrust legislation and commended malefactors of great wealth. Condemned malefactors of great wealth, not commended. Condemned. Very different. In foreign affairs, he was equally active. He negotiated a peace settlement which ended the Russo-Japanese War, the Treaty of Portsmouth, for which he received the Nobel Prize. Nobel Peace Prize specifically. He sent the main American fleet on an expedition around the world and urged the building of an even greater navy. He took part in a conference of the powers over the African claims of France and Germany, but he is best known for the Panama Canal affair. The French had attempted to build a canal across Panama. The work had proceeded slowly, and the contract with the Republic of Colombia, owner of the canal strip, threatened to expire. Some congressmen were in favor of a rival route in Nicaragua. Suddenly, the people of Panama rose in revolt and declared themselves independent of Colombia. Roosevelt at once recognized Panama and threatened to use force if Colombia intervened. He bought the right of way from Panama, not Colombia, and thus left Colombia with a grievance for which, in Harding's time, the United States had to pay solace money. Oh boy. Roosevelt's position was characteristic. I took Panama, and while the debate goes on, the canal does too. Uh, this was typical of Roosevelt's methods. He quoted an African proverb, "Walk softly, but carry a big stick." Sometimes the stick was more in evidence than the soft step. Since Bryan had been twice defeated, the Democrats turned to a conservative and nominated Judge Parker of New York, a little known and not very impressive politician. Roosevelt, uh, oh boy, Roosevelt in 1904 was reelected by the biggest popular vote ever given to a nominee up to that time. Only the Solid South held out against him. In 1908, the Democrats went back to Bryan. Roosevelt would have liked to run again, but he had promised in 1904 not to do so. So, he supported the candidacy of William Howard Taft, the former able governor of the Philippines and Secretary of War in Roosevelt's cabinet. In later years, Taft became Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. In order to not embarrass his successor, Roosevelt went hunting in Africa. He little knew that on his return he would break with his friend and head a new radical third party. No Republican since Lincoln had left such an impression on American life as did Roosevelt. His opponents accused him of vanity and egotism. But his chief defect was that he was so intense a partisan that he saw everything in black and white. His adverse judgments of the Democratic dead, such as Jefferson, and of the living Democrats, such as Wilson, were were so extreme as to be almost absurd. Nevertheless, although he lacked subtlety, he was so courageous, honest, and forthright that few men in political life have been more loved and admired. Yeah, so Theodore Roosevelt, probably one of the most interesting, one of the most interesting men of the earlier 20th century. Um, really, a kind of he really embodies that idea that we have of these these giants of men that the 1800s had a lot of. You have people like um, the Chancellor of what would become Germany, Otto von Bismarck. Is larger than life character. You have a lot of these characters in the 1800s. Well, as we get to the 1900s, a lot of that starts to die off. But you still have some of them, and Roosevelt is kind of one of those guys. He is very larger than life. He's very brash. He's very honest, and he's very loud and big. But I mean, that was Roosevelt, and honestly, he's a very, very interesting character. For a while there, he had kind of been looked down negatively, hadn't looked at it, but as time has gone on, Roosevelt's been seen more and more as um, one of the most interesting presidents and one of the best. But now we'll get on to the pictures. Above is a cartoon from the New York Herald, 6th of February 1905, showing President Theodore Roosevelt in combat with the Railroad Trust. During the Roosevelt administration, 25 indictments of trusts were brought by the Department of Justice. Yeah, Roosevelt did not like the trusts. He's really a lot of the reason that monopolies get broken up. It's because of Theodore Roosevelt, and he had the gumption. He probably would have gone out and fought them if they were like, "Hey, to settle this, we have to fight." He probably would have done it. I'm gonna be honest. At the left here is Theodore Roosevelt and his associates in the New York Assembly of 1882. You can see Roosevelt there. Look at that mustache. Jeez. But yeah, Roosevelt, obviously a New York guy. Um, very, very, very interesting time period for New York, to say the least. At the left, here is Theodore Roosevelt in his Army uniform as a lieutenant colonel of the cavalry in 1898. This is probably the most famous image of Roosevelt. Part of that has to do with movies, specifically Night at the Museum. You have Robin Williams playing him in his cavalry uniform. Um, but yeah, Theodore Roosevelt, obviously cavalry guy, the Rough Riders, so very, very interesting. At the right here is Roosevelt wearing buckskins in 1885. This was during the time when he spent part of each year on his ranch in the Dakotas. Yeah, he like they said in these, Roosevelt did all sorts of different things. One of those being a rancher in the Dakotas. Um, he just liked to do that. He could have lived the lap of luxury. He could have lived very happily and comfortably, but instead he goes and does all these crazy things. They might not get into it, but there is a story that if they don't get into it in here, I will tell at the end. At the left is the nomination of Theodore Roosevelt for president in 1904. The drawing was captioned "Scene of tumultuous enthusiasm" at the first mention of the president's name in the brilliant nomination speech at the National Convention at Chicago. Yeah, people liked Roosevelt, even during his time, quite a bit. At the right is Roosevelt and his cabinet on horseback on the 10th of November, 1906. Ever the athlete, Roosevelt at times forced guests to exert themselves physically. Yeah, he famous uh, boxing time. He'd like to box in the White House very famously. One of the times he actually somewhat kind of blinds himself in one eye because of it. At the far right is TR with Edith in 1903. The children from left to right are Quentin, 5, 10. So let's see if I can do this. Quentin, 5, Ted, 15, Archie, 9, Alice, 19, um, Kermit, 13, and Ethel, 11. Yeah, TR, very sad story. His wife and his mother actually die the same day, and he writes a thing that's like, "The light in my life has gone." Very sad story. And then below, a typical fire and brimstone speech. Yeah, Roosevelt known for fire and brimstone. He's loud, he's boisterous. There's actually a speech when he's running for the third term as the Bull Moose Party, where he will be shot and continue his speech. And what happened was he had paper in his chest that was the speech, and it had slowed down the bullet, and that's why it didn't kill him. That's at least what the thought was at the time. Probably true. Probably true. But I said I'd tell that story. So one of the ways to tell Roosevelt, very interestingly, is there's a story of Roosevelt. He's out camping or whatever, and these guys had stolen from him. I don't remember exactly what it was, but they stolen from him. I think they stole his boat, is what it was. So a lot of people at his time would have been like, were just like, yeah, just leave it. It's whatever. We get a new boat, whatever. I believe it was a boat. It might have been something else. I don't think it was a boat. I don't know. Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter really to the story. They stole from him, and a lot of people said, just leave it. Just leave it. He says, no, I'm not going to leave it. He chops down a tree, or I think a few trees actually, builds a boat, and chases the guys down, captures them himself, and delivers them to justice. Very TR. Very TR. One of the most kind of funny and interesting presidents in that regard. But that is going to do it for this video. If you guys liked the video, leave a like. If you have anything you can improve on these videos, leave a comment down below. I appreciate your feedback. And as always, subscribe. It really does help out the channel. Thank you.